There is a moment, and if you have lived through narcissistic abuse, you already know this moment exists, even if you have never had the language for it, where something shifts. Not loudly, not dramatically, not in the way movies or books describe a turning point. It is quieter than that, smaller, almost invisible. But it is one of the most psychologically significant things you will ever witness in your life. And the reason you could never explain it to anyone else is because it does not happen in words. It happens in the body. It happens in a flicker of the eye, a subtle change in posture, a forced smile that arrives half a second too late, a gesture repeated just once too many times. And if you have ever sat across from someone who once held enormous psychological power over you and felt even for just a fraction of a moment that something was different, that something had slipped, that they were working harder than usual just to appear calm, then this is for you. Because what you sensed was real. What you felt was not paranoia. What you noticed was the first visible crack in a structure that was never as solid as they needed you to believe. This is the moment narcissists dread more than anything you could say to them. More than confrontation, more than exposure, more than argument, the moment their body betrays what their words are desperately trying to conceal. And the reason most people miss it is because they are still watching what the narcissist is saying instead of watching what the narcissist's nervous system is screaming. What you are about to understand is not theory. It is the raw, precise, emotionally accurate reality of what happens inside a narcissistic person when they begin to lose their grip on you. It is the behavioral signature of a collapsing ego. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Once you understand it, the dynamic that once made you feel powerless will never look the same again. If this is the kind of content that helps you understand yourself and others more deeply, stay close to this channel. Subscribe now and keep this in your life, because what comes next is going to reach places inside you that have been waiting for exactly this understanding. The assumption most people hold is that narcissists are powerful, that the control they exert over others comes from some deep internal reservoir of psychological strength. But this is the exact illusion they need you to maintain, because the clinical, documented, psychologically precise truth is that narcissistic behavior is not the expression of strength. It is the management of extreme fragility. Everything a narcissist does in a relationship, every manipulation, every control tactic, every emotional withdrawal, every carefully deployed compliment or criticism, all of it is in service of one desperate unconscious goal: the regulation of their own internal collapse. They do not control you because they are powerful. They control you because without your emotional reactions, they do not know how to feel real. Now consider what happens when their primary source of emotional regulation, meaning you, your reactions, your attention, your distress, your compliance, begins to dry up. When you stop reacting with the emotional intensity they depend on. When your face no longer flushes with the anxiety they expect to see. When you simply become still, calm, present, but unmoved. What happens to them physiologically in that moment is something most survivors never think to observe because they are still too busy managing their own internal state. But here is what their body is doing while you are managing yours. The first thing you will notice is the eye behavior. Narcissists use eye contact as an instrument of dominance. In the beginning of a relationship, their gaze is intense, magnetic, hypnotic. They stare in a way that feels like being truly seen. But watch what happens to that same eye contact when their influence begins to erode. When they look at you and your face does not give them the emotional confirmation they are seeking, the eye contact changes. It becomes slightly unfocused, not dramatically, but in the way that a person's gaze shifts when they are recalculating. When the formula is not producing the expected result, you will see the eyes dart just once, just briefly, to some neutral point in the room. Not out of shame, out of disorientation, because your calm face just told their nervous system something it is not equipped to process, that you are no longer theirs to read. You have become illegible to them. And an illegible target is to a narcissist genuinely terrifying. Following the eye contact shift, watch the posture. When a narcissist is in full influence, their posture is expansive, open, relaxed in the way of someone who believes the room belongs to them. But when the emotional ground beneath them becomes uncertain, the posture contracts subtly, just slightly. A shoulder that was fully back rolls forward by 2 degrees. The chin that was elevated drops just enough to be different without being obvious. The The stance that was planted and dominant begins to carry a faint, careful quality. The physical vocabulary of someone who is no longer completely sure where the edges of the room are. Most people, when they notice this, instinctively feel something is wrong because they have been conditioned to read the narcissist's confidence as the emotional weather of the relationship. But what is actually happening at its deepest level is not the building of a storm. It is the first visible evidence of structural failure. The posture is not contracting in preparation for attack. It is contracting in the way of something that has been overextended for too long and is beginning finally to feel the weight of its own unsupported architecture. Now comes the one that will forever change the way you read faces, the smile, specifically the timing of the smile. Human beings who are genuinely at ease smile in a particular way. The emotional experience arrives first. The face follows naturally and the smile resolves itself from the inside out. But a narcissist under pressure whose influence is weakening and who is now consciously working to appear unaffected smiles differently. The smile is produced. It is assembled, and if you are paying attention, you will notice a delay that is only a fraction of a second long, but that speaks volumes in psychological language. The eyes do not smile first. The expression does not radiate outward from genuine internal ease. Instead, the mouth moves, the cheeks follow, and the eyes arrive late or not at all. This is not a small thing. This is the face telling the truth that the voice is working to contradict. There is also something in the hands and gestures that most people completely ignore. When a narcissist feels secure, their gestures are deliberate, measured, and timed to emphasize rather than to soothe. But when the emotional ground begins to shift, the gestures change character entirely. They become self-directed. A hand that would normally be pointing or emphasizing instead moves to touch the face, rub the neck, adjust clothing that did not need adjusting. These are self-soothing behaviors. They are the physical evidence of a nervous system working to regulate itself from the outside when it cannot regulate itself from the inside. And the reason this matters is not merely intellectual. It is because you spent months or years being made to feel that this person was utterly composed, utterly in control, utterly above the emotional turbulence they routinely created in you. Watching their hands quietly betray their inner state is not a small victory. It is a profound recalibration of reality. Here is where we have to go deeper, because understanding the physical signals is only part of what you need. The part that will truly free you is understanding why your emotional detachment produces these signals, why your calm is more destabilizing to a narcissist than your anger ever was. When you were reactive, when you cried, when you fought back, when you pleaded, when you dissolved, you were giving the narcissist exactly what they needed. Not because you were weak, because you were human. Your reactions confirmed something essential to their psychological survival, that they were real, that they were significant, that they had the ability to affect the world around them through another person's emotional state. Every tear you cried was to some deep and unconscious part of them evidence of their own existence. You were not just a person to them. You were a mirror that confirmed through its reflections of pain and compliance and longing that they mattered. When you stop being reactive, when your face becomes calm and your body becomes still and your voice becomes level, something extraordinary happens in their psychological architecture. The mirror goes dark. And a person who has organized their entire emotional reality around a mirror experiences a dark mirror as something close to psychological annihilation. This is the clinical reality of what researchers describe as narcissistic injury. And the body language you see in the aftermath is the visible expression of a nervous system in free fall. This is also why so many survivors report that when they finally found their calm, when they stopped engaging, stopped defending, stopped explaining, the narcissist's behavior escalated rather than softened. They became louder, more provocative, more outrageous. And if you experienced this, you likely interpreted it as evidence that you were doing something wrong. But now you understand what was actually happening. They were doing whatever it took to get your face to move again because a shaking voice meant they were still in control. Your stillness meant something their system had no framework to tolerate. This channel exists because this level of understanding changes lives. Not in a small way, in the kind of way where everything that confused you for years suddenly has a structure, a logic, a name. Subscribe right now. Stay close to this work because what is coming next is the part that most people never reach. The part about what is happening inside you at the same moment their body language begins to crack. When you reach the point where your body stops reacting to the narcissist the way it once did. When the anxiety that used to spike at the sound of their footsteps begins to quiet. When the hypervigilance that scanned their every expression for weather reports begins to relax. When you can sit in the same room as them and feel something close to neutral, you tend to experience that state not as power but as numbness, not as freedom but as flatness. Because you have been so conditioned to feel something overwhelming in their presence that the absence of overwhelm feels like loss rather than recovery. But the flatness you feel is not emptiness. It is equilibrium. For the first time, possibly in a very long time, your nervous system is not running a survival protocol. It is simply existing. And a nervous system that has been in crisis mode for months or years does not immediately recognize the experience of safety. It interprets the absence of threat as the absence of meaning. This is why so many survivors, at the very moment they are making genuine psychological progress, convince themselves that something is wrong with them. What is actually happening is this. The emotional energy that was continuously drained by the narcissistic dynamic is gradually becoming available again. It seeps back slowly the way light moves through a window as a storm passes. And then in one of the most quietly profound experiences a survivor ever has, you begin to notice that you are thinking your own thoughts again, not thoughts shaped by their narrative of who you are, not thoughts filtered through the lens of what they would say about this. Your own thoughts unfiltered, unmanaged, genuinely yours. Now let us talk about what happens to a narcissist in the days and weeks following this shift. Once the initial escalation fails to produce the desired emotional reaction in you, the behavioral landscape changes again. And it changes in a direction that most survivors are completely unprepared for, because it looks from the outside like the narcissist is finally becoming the person you always wanted them to be. Suddenly they are attentive. Suddenly there are gestures that once would have meant everything to you. And the reason understanding body language at this level is so critical is because the performance has changed, but the architecture beneath it has not. The gestures have become more elaborate, but the eyes are doing the same thing. The smile is still assembled. The self-soothing gestures are still present. The posture still carries that subtle, barely visible uncertainty of someone who is working rather than being. The body does not lie at this level. The conscious mind can learn new scripts. It can deploy new tactics. It can simulate the emotional vocabulary of genuine change with genuine sophistication. But the autonomic nervous system cannot be consciously directed in real time. It tells the truth that the performance is trying to overwrite. And now that you know what to look for, you will see it. You are communicating something with your stillness, something their nervous system receives and processes even if their conscious mind refuses to acknowledge it. You are communicating that the mirror is no longer active, that the lever no longer moves the mechanism it was connected to, that the version of you they constructed, frightened, uncertain, dependent on their approval for a sense of reality, no longer exists. And the body language you are beginning to observe in them is simply their nervous system receiving that communication and showing in its unguarded physical vocabulary that it understands. This is the transformation that nobody in your life might be able to see because from the outside, your recovery looks quiet. You have not delivered a devastating speech. You have simply become a person whose face no longer does what they need it to do. And this quiet, internal, almost invisible shift is in every real psychological sense the most complete form of reclaiming yourself that exists. Not because it defeats them, but because it unconditions you. Because it proves to your own nervous system that you are a separate person, a whole person, a person whose emotional reality is not managed by someone else's performance. You are not broken. You never were. You were operating in a system designed to make you believe that your perception was wrong, your feelings were excessive, your needs were burdensome, and your worth was conditional. And your nervous system responded to that system the way any healthy nervous system would, with vigilance, with adaptation, with the heroic ongoing effort to maintain connection in an environment that was consistently unsafe. The hypervigilance that developed in you was not a flaw. It was a feat of psychological survival. The narcissist who once held influence over you is not the towering, immovable, psychologically superior force they performed for you. They are a person whose nervous system learned very early in their life that they could not survive emotional exposure. That vulnerability was annihilation. That the only way to feel real was through the confirmed reactions of people who reflected their existence back to them. This does not excuse anything. It does not require your compassion or your forgiveness or your continued presence, but it does explain the body language. It does explain the fragility beneath the performance. It does explain why your calm is to them not merely indifference, but a genuine psychological threat. Because your calm says clearly and quietly in the language that their body reads without the permission of their mind, I see you. I understand what you are doing, and it no longer works. When they lose influence, they do not lose it violently. They lose it quietly. In a flicker of the eye, in a shoulder that drops 2 degrees, in a smile that arrives too late, in a hand that reaches for a face to touch for reasons the conscious mind does not acknowledge. In all of the small, precise, psychologically accurate ways that a human body tells the truth when the performance it has been maintaining can no longer keep up with the reality it is trying to hide. You see it now, you understand it now. And the person who sees and understands will never be controlled by what they can see and understand. This is not the end of a process. This is the moment the process becomes irreversible. This is the moment you stop being a mirror and start being yourself, whole, perceptive, calm, and permanently beyond their reach. Subscribe. Stay with this work. Share this with someone who is still inside the confusion and still trying to explain to people who cannot see it why they feel the way they feel. Because the understanding we build here does not just inform, it transforms. It takes what was done to you and without erasing it or minimizing it, converts it into the most powerful form of psychological freedom available to a human being. The freedom of genuine, earned, irrevocable clarity. You have already begun. And the narcissist's body language, the next time you observe it with these eyes, will confirm everything you have just understood quietly, precisely, irrevocably, in the language the body cannot lie. And